Welcome to everybody. I'm Gil Leclercq from Castle Malting. I'm the R&D manager, and I'm going to present this webinar with my colleague Gabriel. So we are used to present this kind of webinar starting from the production of the malt to the use of these malts in breweries. So I'm going to talk about the production in the malt house, and my colleague Gabriel is going to talk about the brewing aspect.
OK， 那么大家首先欢迎你们来参加我们本年度的第2次网络研讨会啊，比利时城堡麦芽公司组织的。那么今天刚刚这位首先会跟大家发言，开始给大家介绍的呢是来自我们研发部门的研发经理，叫吉尔。那他呢主要是涉及到关于麦芽生产的这一部分信息和知识。另外等会还有一位这个屏幕上大家能看到。叫 Gabriel 大胡子的这个老外，他是会给我们介绍麦芽的使用，也就是酿造方面的一些应用和信息。Okay,
so maybe a bit of context. This webinar is organized as being part of a webinar series that will be all along 2021. So this is the second webinar. This is webinar number 2. The previous one was about the new product that we launched in 2020, and the next webinar, the third one, is about the kiln malt. We also have a webinar about roasted and smoked malt, and still another one after about the technical malts and adjuncts.
那么因为大家众所周知，受到疫情的影响，今年包括从去年开始，所有的外国人呢到中国境内来都要有一个长达28天的隔离期，所以呢现在他们基本上都不能到现场来，只能从网络上给我们组织一些这样的信息分享。那么我们计划呢是在2021年会组织大概4到6场这样的网络研讨会。那么上一次呢是第1期，在3月份的时候，我们主要是介绍了2020年比利时城堡麦芽公司新出的几款麦芽产品。那么今天这一场呢是第2期，第2期的主讲主题呢是 Cara Malts， 就是我们的焦糖麦芽。到下一期第3次的时候，我们会主要讲一些烘干麦芽和烘焙麦芽。那么在之后呢，我们还会讲到现在比较流行的像烟熏风味的麦芽，以及之后还会有的其他一些系列，包括像技术功能呐，有一些特殊运用的这些方面。因为城堡麦芽的公司的产品种类非常丰富，我们需要把这些信息分享给大家，才能更有效、更合理的去使用我们的产品。Okay,
can move to the next slide, please. So in 2020, as you know, with the pandemic situation, that was a bit special. That year we had much more resources to allocate to the research and to the development of new malts. So the owner of Castle Malting, Mr. Ducey, set his goal to reach 100 types of malts by the end of 2020. So it was quite a big increase, but we did it. We reached these 100 types of malts, and we're going to talk about the Cara Malts that we developed today.
那么在2020年呢，因为整个全球疫情的影响，所以我们出差减少了。那么公司呢，在总经理让杜西先生的指导思想下，就是我们把重点放在了研发这一块。在去年年底到达之前呢，我们一共是达到了研发出来有100多个品种，是完成了基本上应该是属于麦芽厂里面品种最多的一家。Okay,
so next slide, please. Yes, so here is an overview of the malts that we have currently at Castle Malting. So it's per category, malt category. So in red, the numbers in red are the malts that were available, until the end of 2019. Obviously, they are still available, but we developed some new malts that are in green. And as you can see, we focused on caramel malts. We had 6 new caramel malts that will be the topic of today. but we also added a lot of new organic malts, wheat specialty malts, a lot of new flakes and adjuncts. So overall we added 27 new malts to the 74 malts that we already had.
OK， 那么大家可以从这一张像图表一样的上面可以看到啊，这是我们公司目前所有麦芽的基本分类。除了顶上这个是基础麦芽，因为基础麦芽呢没有太多的品种，所以目前所有红色的字体表示的是2020年之前就已经有的那一些品种的数量。那么绿色的这个呢，后面加上的这个绿色的数字呢，代表这一类麦芽在2020年新开发出来的种数。那大家可以看到，像左边这个焦糖系列 Cara Malts 焦糖系列，从5种又增加了6种，一共到达了11种。这个就是我们今天所要重点来讲述的这一部分内容。那么除此以外呢，我们也可以看到，像有机麦芽也是新增了10款。那么包括小麦芽新增了3款，还有麦片、生麦芽这一类的呢，也是增加了5款。所以总数上呢，一共是增加了有27款麦芽，加上原来的74款，所以一共是达到了101款麦芽产品。这是我们现在现有的全系列，先有给大家做一个比较 overall general 的一个总的印象。OK。
Okay, next please. So just to remember a bit about the process. So at Castle Malting, we ran a very old traditional process. So that goes through 3 steps: steeping, germination, and kilning. So if you are interested about this process, the next webinar is about kilned malts. So we go much deeper into the details of the process during that webinar. But basically, that's a 8-day cycle. So it takes 8 days to go from the barley to the finished malt.
OK。那么这张图呢，基本上是我们每次要给大家做一些麦芽制成相关的信息时候，都会来给大家展示的啊。从我们在农场上，就大家有可能会问啊，有一些朋友会关注说啊，你们工厂是什么麦呀？像一般现在市场上比较流行的，像有奥麦啊、法麦啊、佳麦啊这一些。那其实这个呢，提供的是一个大麦的来源，就是种植的一个原产地。我们比利时城堡所用的就近取材，而且都是用的那个法国的生产大麦。那么这种大麦呢，本身它的品质就比较优良，然后我们也会经过来料检测来做一些筛选。除此以外呢，到了工厂以后，我们的第一个步骤就是浸泡，在这一步当中呢，会起到一个湿润和清洗的作用，然后呢，就会将这些大麦进行发芽。发芽完了以后呢，再进行烘干。那么等到我们下一次研讨会再重点给大家讲解烘干麦芽的时候，会对这3个步骤来做更详细的解释。那么今天呢，我们就大概先把这个步骤给大家介绍一下。所以城堡麦芽通常的一个制作工艺，从大麦进场到成品麦芽制出，大概的周期是需要8天以上。OK。
Okay, next please. So here is a diagram to help you understand how the process is linked to the malt categories. So as I just explained, from the barley, we go through steeping, germination, and kilning to produce base malt, but also specialty kilned malts. We can also take the Pilsen malts and we put it through in a roaster, and then we produce some roasted malts. Or we can take the barley and we put it in the roaster and we can produce roasted barley. Or, and that will be the topic of today, we take the green malt, so the germinated barley at the end of the germination step, we take it from the germination box and we put it in the roaster and we will produce caramel malts.
OK， 那么其实城堡麦芽公司啊，我们其实本身并不会去种植大麦，我们的目标是把大麦转化成大家可以用来酿酒的麦芽制品。 那么这张图呢，也是基本上凡是我们讲到的时候都会来给大家介绍的。这个首先大麦进厂以后，第一步就是这个3步，就是跟刚才前面那张图是一样的，对吧？先是浸泡，然后再是发芽，再是烘干。那么在烘干以后呢，首先就可以直接得到我们所谓的基础麦芽，比如皮尔森麦芽。那么皮尔森麦芽呢，通过前面3个步骤以后，就直接可以作为我们酿酒用来提供糖分的一个基础。当然我们也可以将这些烘干的基础麦芽，比如皮尔森，再进行轻微的烘干，就可以得到颜色稍微深一点点的这种偏向于基础麦芽性质的这个特种麦芽。比如说淡色埃尔，那淡色埃尔在我们工厂还是归为基础麦芽性质的啊，还有维也纳麦芽，还有慕尼黑类黑素，这一些都是我们的烘干麦芽类别。或者呢，我们可以将这个皮尔森麦芽，就是我们刚刚进行轻度烘干的麦芽，再次把它放到那个烘焙炉当中，用较高的温度和较长的时间来再次烘烤，就可以得到了我们的烘烤麦芽，也叫烘焙麦芽。那么这种呢，就比如说颜色比较浅的，相对比较最浅的一个就是饼干麦芽 biscuit， 这款麦芽呢，它也是非常的风味非常的浓郁的，一款属于是入门级的特种麦芽，烘烤麦芽。那当然后面还有颜色更深的，比如咖啡麦芽、巧克力麦芽、黑麦芽等等。这个不同的麦芽都是用来适合做大家所需要的这个酒款的。那么当然我们也可以将大麦不进行浸泡发芽，而直接放到烘焙炉当中去烘烤。这个时候呢，就是会产生就是直接作用的，就是没有发过芽的这个大麦烤出来的，我们称之为烘焙大麦。这个在市面上现在应该也比较多了，圈内的朋友大家多数都应该多多少少有一些了解，通常可以用来做一些像世涛风味的啤酒。那么最后这一部分呢，就是我们今天会给大家详细来介绍的焦糖麦芽。焦糖麦芽它的制作工艺呢是这样子，先将这个麦芽浸泡以后呢发芽好了，不把它烘干，而是把它放到一个我们称之为发好的这个我们称之为绿麦芽啊，把它放到一个糖化的一个容器当中，用一定的温度和湿度，让这个发好芽的麦芽颗粒里面的这些淀粉质转成糖分，然后呢再把它结晶，其实相当于在国内有一些地方是称之为叫结晶麦芽的。我可能这个比那个老外讲的要多一些啊，因为他等会也会给大家讲到的。那么这样呢就可以得到了我们的焦糖麦芽。焦糖麦芽呢也是按照颜色由浅到深我们是以 EBC 为单位来区分的，从浅色到淡色到红宝石焦糖麦芽到黄金麦芽，以及我们今年2020年新出的好几款麦芽，等一下会给大家具体来说一下。OK, Gil.
Okay, next please. So as you understood, to produce some really good caramel malts, what we need is a really good roaster. And in fact, we have 2 roasters at Castle Malting that I'm going to introduce. The one on the left is, I would say, the oldest one, but it's not really old. It's from 2011, and the one on the right is an electrical technology that is much more recent. I'm going to introduce these 2 technologies on the next slides a bit more in detail.
OK. 那么这张图呢，给大家展示的是我们两套工艺设备。左边这一套呢，是我们在比利时西部工厂老厂里面一直沿用了已经有很多年的这一套设备。它是一个烘焙炉，包括做焦糖麦芽的那个叫糖化箱也是在这边。那么右边这一套呢，是我们在近几年新开发、新投资建设的一套新的设备。在下一个 slide 里面会给大家重点来介绍啊，我们来看一下。
Okay, so the new technologies that we have for roasting at Castle Malting is explained here. So that's the most recent roaster we have. So a few points to remember about the technology is that basically it's a roaster, so we can use it to produce roasted malt, Cara Malts, and even other types of malts. It has several advantages. So it's a pipe. It's a pipe in which we send the product by the bottom, and it will move up to the top of the tower, and it will go out by the top. It's very special, and because of the engines at the bottom, the tower will vibrate, and the vibration will make the product move up. So we don't work per batch as with drums. We work as a continuous flow. We can run a continuous production. It has the advantage also to run based on electricity, so it's green energy, and we have no nitrosamines in malts because we don't burn fuel with this kind of technology. And it has a very low carbon footprint because, well, we have about 10,000 square meters of photovoltaic panel on the rooftop, so very green technology.
OK， 那么在这边左下图呢，大家可以看到我们给大家展示的这个一个简便的示意图啊。这个新的设备呢，它这个其实是我们工厂的一个新技术，给大家展示一下呢，是让大家了解，就是我们这个麦芽是用什么样的方式来生产出来的，也可以更加传播一些就是制麦厂的一些文化和工艺吧。像在这左下方的这张图上，大家可以看到，它其实就是一个塔。那么在这个塔的底部呢，有一个发动机。这个发动机呢，在开启的时候，它周围的这一些，你看这个塔上面周围是缠绕着一圈螺旋上升的这个管道。这个管道呢会发生震动。那么我们的麦芽呢是从左边这个左下角这个桶里面输入到这个管道当中去的，是从底部开始输进去的。这张图上所画的那个黄色的部分就是我们的麦芽，这是一个示意图啊。然后呢，通过震动，这些从底部打进去的麦芽会逐步的上升。那么这些管道呢，因为我们都设置成了所需要的温度，在它整个麦芽通过这一个塔的这一圈管道到达顶部再出来的时候，它其实就已经完成了整个烘烤的时间和工艺。那么用这样的方式来生产，就跟我们前面那张图上这个左边这张图上看到的不一样。左边这个图呢，因为由于它这个炉子有一定的尺寸，有一定的大小，所以它每一批进炉的这个大小是固定的，它是有一个批量的。那么对于右边这个就是这套设备，新设备呢，它这个生产其实就没有这个炉子大小的限制了，基本上只要大家只要我们不断的去把它输入进去，就可以生产一个完整连续性的生产。那么除此以外呢，最大的一个优势就是它因为不涉及到明火，所以不会产生像亚硝胺类的这一些化学物质，影响它的安全性和健康性。那么除此以外呢，因为在欧盟国家其实对于环保还是比较重视的，我们在东部的这个工厂用的全部都是太阳能，在屋顶上方，我这边文字上也有写啊，屋顶上方是搭建了有大概1万平方米的太阳能板，所以用来供电这个发动机工作的都是收集的太阳能啊，这个是我们想要给大家宣传的一些工厂的先进技术和一些生产理念。OK。
Thanks. So the second roaster that we have that is called Castle 8000 is more conventional. So this roasting technology is really interesting in the production of caramel malts, because what you see is that at the bottom we have 2 roasting drums. At the bottom in the center we have a cooling system to make sure that the product is cooled just after production to stabilize, I mean, the color, the flavors, everything. But what is really interesting is that upstairs behind the yellow thanks Celine, we have what we call a preparator, and in this preparator basically we will prepare the product before the caramelization in the roasting drums. So the idea is that when you produce caramel malts, you have 2 main steps: saccharification, so I will just explain it a bit better after, and the caramelization. Usually these 2 steps are performed in the drums in any malt house around the world. That's how they do it. They run the 2 steps in the roasting drum. What we can do with this kind of roasting technology is running the saccharification upstairs in the vessel, here upstairs, and the caramelization downstairs in the drums. And it makes a product that is much better caramelized than if we were running the 2 steps within the drum.
OK， 那么这个图呢是刚刚给大家看的，就是我们的老厂里面一直用了很多年的这一套设备系统啊，很大。在左边左下角，就是靠近中点的地方有一个人站的，就是基本上你能感受出来它的一个尺寸啊。我是有去现场看过这一套设备的，真的在现场还是觉得蛮大。是这样子，大家看到，首先在下方，我有标示出来有2个烘焙炉，一个在左边，一个在右边，对吧？那这个呢，就是起到一个烘烤麦芽的作用，就是在这个地方把麦芽烘烤到我们所需要的色度和香味的。那么在中间往下呢，有一个冷却塔，这个地方呢，就是我们将麦芽烘烤到一定程度以后进行冷却，锁定它的风味和香气的。那么在顶上有一个叫糖化箱的，就是在这个黄色的像一个平台后面的这个部分一样的。那么这个呢就比较有意思了，就是主要是用来制作我们今天要聊到的这个焦糖麦芽的。其实所谓焦糖麦芽呢，我刚刚在介绍前面的步骤的时候有说到，它其实相当于我们国内所称的结晶麦芽。那它为什么是这样说呢？因为大部分特种麦芽它只是将这些麦芽放到这个烘焙炉里面去进行烘烤，达到我们所需要的这个温度和色度。而糖化，我们所谓的这边制麦过程中的糖化，相当于是把酿酒的一部分工作提前到制麦中就完成。那么在发好芽的这个湿的绿麦芽拿到这个糖化箱当中以后呢，在60多度的环境下将它进行糖化，它里面的淀粉就已经转化成了糖，然后等到它充分转化好以后，再转移到下方那2个烘焙炉当中进行烘干，就可以形成将糖结晶的这个过程。那么这个呢就是从总体的步骤工艺上来讲是这样的一个理论，由此就可以得到我们所需要的焦糖麦芽。Okay,
next please.
Did you talk about the récupération?
Yes, you can. Yeah, I forgot that point, but it's not that relevant. I mean, all the pipes here, you can mention that all the pipes here are for heat recovery. So the idea is to send the heat from one roaster to the other one while they work alternatively. But you can tell them that.
OK， 那么像这边我刚刚问他有没有说的一个就是热能回收系统，因为我一般他们在跟我讲的时候都会有提到这个，还是那句话，就欧盟国家的这些小国家的企业对于环保比较重视，像这个因为在加工麦芽的过程当中会产生很多的热量，那么我们会尽量的去收集这些热量回收，那么把冷却塔冷却下来的这个温度就把它转移到烘焙当中去，烘烤的过程当中去，尽量的节约这些能源啊。Okay,
good, thanks. So here is a slide about the 2 steps for the production of caramel malts. So the first step is what we call the saccharification. I think all brewers know what I'm talking about because the process is basically the same as during brewing. So we will use enzymes to run an enzymatic hydrolysis to produce simple sugars. So from the starch, we will produce some glucose. And this is the first step that is performed upstairs in the preparator. And then what we will do is reassembling what we call polymerization of these simple glucose molecules into caramel. So this will, the idea is to produce some complex sugars. So we have the starch, we divide, and then we reassemble, and we will form these complex sugars that are responsible for the caramel flavors. So the first step is performed upstairs in the preparator with a very humid atmosphere. And the second step is performed in the drums.
OK， 那么这个是我们把刚刚我就是口述的这个步骤呢，把它分解开来了啊。左边第一步红色写的第一步糖化酶解，这个其实在各位酿酒师这边是再熟悉不过的了。那你们酿酒的第一步就是把麦芽糖化，那么我们呢就相当于把这个步骤提前先做了。我们会把淀粉在酶的作用下，酶解作用下，先在我们这边在制麦厂里面就把它转化成单糖，通常情况下就是指葡萄糖。然后转化成葡萄糖以后呢，再通过聚合反应将它结晶，也就是把单糖变成复合糖，这样呢就会给这个形成焦糖麦芽特有的一些风味。下面就是一个工人在翻箱的这个一个图片啊。OK。
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about the Cara Malts that we had until the end of 2019, that we still have, obviously. The one that we developed last year and the one that we are planning to develop in the future, because there is an ongoing research project about the process of caramelization, and we intend to produce even higher quality caramel malts that we even produce now.
OK， 那么这个呢，就是给大家讲一下我们的演变的过程。之前在2019年，这个是一张总体啊，等会下面会具体讲。在2020年之前呢，我们大概是有5种这个焦糖麦芽，从2020年开始新开发那些，包括等会我们后面还会讲到，我们未来还要继续开发出来更加完美的焦糖麦芽。我们还有其他的目标在进行当中。OK。
Okay. So here are the malts, the caramel malts that you probably all know from Castle Malting. So we had 5 caramel malts, the Clair, Blanc, Ruby, Gold, and Special Belgium. And I'm not going to present these malts, because I think most of you know these malts. You can find all the information and specification about these malts online on our website. I'm going to talk a bit more about the malts that we developed last year.
这个是我们原来就既有的5款，那么我今天就不在这边详细的说了，因为可能很多我们的中国城堡麦芽老客户都知道，像我们的淡色焦糖、浅色焦糖、红宝石焦糖、黄金焦糖都是非常好用的一系列的麦芽产品，包括特种比利时 Special B。那么 Special B 呢是一个2次烘烤的麦芽，这个具体的参数还有技术信息都请大家就可以看网站，或者单独以后会后再找我都可以。那么吉尔今天会给大家重点说一下我们新开发的这几款麦芽。OK。
Okay, so last year we decided to go from 5 caramel malts to 11. So we had the 6 new caramel malts that you see on this slide. The idea was to fill the gaps in terms of colorations, but also in terms of flavors in the products that we already have. So, for example, this Cara Belgium, the first one, would fall between the Cara Blanc and the Cara Ruby. Yes, and this Cara Honey and the Cara Arome, they will be between the Ruby and the Gold. Then we have the Crystal between the Gold and the Special Belgium, as well as the Cara Terra. So you see, we are filling the gaps to provide more detailed, more precise caramel malts that bring some precise color and flavors to the recipe that you want to design. The only malts that is a bit higher in terms of coloration is the Cara Café. So the Cara Café, as the name implies, café, it will provide some slight coffee, cocoa burn flavors. So the idea is not going to go beyond that kind of color index, because otherwise we will start to have these coffee, cocoa burn flavors hiding the caramel flavors, and that's not the objective of this malt. So we had to stop at this level. Also, we developed the Cara Crystal, so bottom left, the Cara Crystal, because we noticed that it's good to avoid confusion between our Chateau Cristal, that is a kilned malt, and the Chateau Cara Cristal, that is a truly caramel malt produced on a roaster.
OK。那这一页他说信息有点多啊，我大概归纳一下，跟大家讲一下。这一页展示的6款呢，就是我们新开发的焦糖麦芽。那么原始的最初的目的呢，其实是为了填补。大家可以看到啊，在这一张原来的这个系列当中，它不同的 EBC 之间跨度呢有一点大，所以有一些酒师会跟我们说啊，你们有没有就是比如说像这个浅色焦糖20 EBC 到红宝石焦糖50 EBC 之间的这个色度的焦糖系列。给我们可以调整我们的配方，根据我们就对酒的这个设计。那么后来呢，我们就在这个跨度之间，不同的跨度之间都做了这样的一些设计的新的焦糖麦芽。比如说大家可以看到这边的 Cara Belgian， 就是我们的比利时焦糖麦芽，它是30到35个 EBC， 就是比原来的浅色焦糖麦芽再稍微深一点点。然后呢，这个 Cara Honey 蜂蜜焦糖麦芽是60到80 EBC。那么它这是介于在红宝石焦糖麦芽和黄金焦糖麦芽之间，包括这个焦香焦糖麦芽也是。那么再往深里，就是水晶焦糖麦芽呢，是比原来的黄金焦糖麦芽再要深一点。特拉也是。那么一直做到这个最后这一款是咖啡焦糖麦芽，大家从名字上就可以听出来，它呢会带有一点点咖啡，还有可可的这种苦苦的焦香的这种味道。那么，我们在做的这个焦糖麦芽时候呢，有深度考虑过，就如果说我可以再把颜色往深里做，但是呢，在这做深了以后呢，就会导致它这种焦香味就太浓，而掩盖掉了焦糖麦芽本身的这种甜口的风味儿，那么就失去了我们做焦糖麦芽这个系列的意义了。所以色度呢，我们就是做到这个400左右，也就是咖啡焦糖麦芽为止。那么像左下角的这一款水晶焦糖麦芽，也是可以跟我们平时所使用的这个水晶麦芽，我不知道大家有没有之前了解过我们的烘干麦芽当中有一款叫水晶麦芽啊，很多朋友之前在问我，就说水晶麦芽是不是就是我们常规所说的结晶麦芽？那么其实不是的啊，我们城堡的水晶麦芽就是叫 Shadow Crystal 那一款呢，是一个正宗的烘干麦芽，就烘焙麦芽。它是直接通过烘烤出来的，不具有结晶的性质。那么这一款 Cara Crystal 才是真正的先糖化再烘干的结晶麦芽，叫水晶焦糖。那么大家在使用的时候呢，主要就是根据不同的色度来调你们的配方，选用其中的一款或者是几款。OK。
Okay, thank you. So the idea was to go even beyond that 11 Cara Malts. So we had this project we still have this project to develop some new caramel malts. We are not even sure that we can call them caramel malts because it's a completely new category, I think. Maybe premium caramel malts, I don't know how it could be called, but we have this project to change the process that is currently used to produce these new malts with new flavors. And I'm going to introduce a bit the preliminary results that we had through the beginning of this project.
OK。那么这个图上面给大家展示的是我们的结晶麦芽的一个剖面图啊。我们之前呢有考虑过给它就是起一个什么样的名字，比如说是做成就是像钻石级的，或者说是更加优化级的，就是特优级的这种叫法啊，就在他们外语里面啊。那么实际上呢，最后呢，我们还是想要给大家具体的来说明一下这一些新款的麦芽，它焦糖麦芽它到底是好在什么地方。Okay.
Okay, next. Yeah. So if you remember what I was saying about the roasting technology that we have in our production site, so we had this preparator upstairs to run the saccharification, and until now we were, I will say, recovering the humid air from the roasters to send it through the pipes to the preparator. But what we plan to do with this new research project is to directly inject some water steam inside the preparator. So the idea is not to recover the humid air, and we will still do it for the malts, the 11 malts that we produce until now. But for the next one, the next malts that are going to be developed, I hope, through this kind of research project, the idea is to directly inject some steam inside the preparator to run a very optimized saccharification.
Okay.
That's the idea.
那么我们现在做还是刚才那张图啊，就是我们现在做的呢，基本上因为在做这个焦糖麦芽的时候，它必须要糖化的时候必须要达到一定的温度和湿度。那么温度呢，在刚才那张图上大家有录出来，我不知道大家有没有注意到啊？我先不跟你们说，如果你们有注意到的话，等会可以告诉我。那么湿度呢，也需要达到一定的湿润程度，不是普通的空气。我们现在做这个目前11款焦糖麦芽的这个加湿方法是通过回收潮湿空气注入进去的。那么我们现在在开发的一个新工艺呢，就是希望能够直接朝里面去打热的蒸汽。那么今后我们在做新开发的其他的焦糖麦芽，可能会用这样的方法，使得它的湿度能够更好的快速达到，并且做出更加稳定和优质的焦糖麦芽。Okay?
Okay, thanks. So how can we know that we will perform some higher caramelization rate through this kind of technology compared to a previous one? Well, we have to assess the caramelization rate. How do we do that? Well, it's quite simple, and I think that you can even do it at your own brewery. The idea is to take a sample of 50 kernels. We do it 3 times. We slice these 50 kernels using this device, and then we will assess the surface that has been the area that has been caramelized, and we can easily see here is I took an example that is quite obvious, where some kernels they are only caramelized in the center or on the periphery, and some of them are fully caramelized, some of them are not. The idea is to assess the total area that is caramelized for these kernels, and we will see that we can find some pretty big differences according to different parameters, different batch of malts.
OK， 那大家呢，在这个是我们给大家介绍一些我们工厂里面检测焦糖麦芽这个结晶程度的方法。那么大家有条件也可以在自己的工厂里面去做这样的实验。比如你们去市场上买到一些结晶麦芽，想要看一看这个结晶麦芽的品质如何，那么可以考虑借鉴我们的这个方法啊。那像我们呢一共是就是比如说一袋焦糖麦芽买回去以后呢，就是取样3次，每次是取50克。我们有这样的一个小工具，就是把每一颗麦芽单颗麦芽都塞到这个小孔里面，然后呢把它用这个有一个锋利的口一下剪断以后呢就会暴露出，大家能看到我的鼠标吗？看不到我注视一下啊，这样能看到我的鼠标了吗？在左边这张图上能够看到这个切开的这个样子，那么右边呢就是我们拍了一下所有的这个结晶的一些剖面图，像比如说这一颗，它的结晶程度就比较好，它整个一个面都是这种透明的，你们可以看到它是透明的这种红红的这种样子，就是已经结晶糖了。那么如果还是白白的呢，这种样子的，基本上就是还是以淀粉质的状态存在，那么就是应该说是没有形成一个好糖。那么还有一些呢，就是比如中间就结晶了，但是周围还是淀粉质，或者是相反的情况，是中间还是淀粉质，外围却结晶成糖了。所以呢，通过这样的方法就可以看到这一批产品它的结晶好不好，做的优不优。我们现在在发展的也是在朝这个方面去在研发啊。OK.
Okay, thanks. You can move to the next slide.
Did you see my mouse right now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay. It was good.
So using these measurements, what we did were taking some samples of different camel malts from different color range from 4 malt houses in Europe. The idea was to assess the percentage of caramelization for each of these malts. So using the technique that we just explained. And what we can see is that, well, first, there is a huge variability among the different malt houses and among the different color range. So as the color increase, the caramelization rate is usually better. And there is a huge potential to improve the caramelization rate, especially for the low coloration. As you can see, between 20 and 40 EBC, caramelization rate is really low. It's like 35–40%. And even for the highest coloration, it's still not that good. I will say it's around 70% on average. So it means that we still have a gap of 30% that could be filled thanks to technology, because with our new technology, I'm going to show you visually that we can have, I mean, between 90 and 100% caramelization rate. That is really high.
OK， 那么这个呢是我们工厂自己做了一个实验啊，我们从欧盟市场上找了4个品牌的麦芽，4个麦芽厂的麦芽产品，做了这样的一个测试，就是我前面那张图上给大家看的那个横截面剖面的那个检测，测出来呢发现有这么几个情况啊，一个呢是颜色色度越浅，它的结晶程度相对越低。大家可以看到，比如说20到40 EBC 的，它的结晶程度可能只有在40%左右。那么像这是第一点。那第二点呢，就是不同的厂家之间它的差异也会很大。比如说看第3个60到90 EBC 里面，它的结晶程度有的是最低的在18%左右，而最高的结晶程度可以达到74%，所以它这个水平也是参差不齐。那么即便是在色度比较高的140到170这个色段呢，也还是有较大的提升空间，在70%左右，那么还有20-30%的提升空间可以去改善。那么我们城堡呢，到目前为止新研发的这一些焦糖麦芽的结晶程度，在用这个方法测试出来以后，可以达到90%以上，90几，相对来说应该还是比较高的了。OK。
Okay, thank you. So here is a comparison between the old process and the new process. So the kernel upstairs, the kernel above are the kernels that can be produced through a process within a drum, with both steps within the drum, and the kernel, below that are the kernels that are produced thanks to the new process with the steam. So both of these batch are 60 EBC, about 60 EBC, and believe me or not, it's the same color, but here we can achieve a much higher caramelization rate using this new technology. Visually, I mean, you can see it very easily. It's more homogeneous among the kernels. You have also this inflated kernel, so you can see that there are some hair within the kernels. We don't exactly know why. And visually, if you see these kernels, they look really big. They look really fat. They are looking beautiful.
OK。那么大家可以看到这张图上呢，我们把这个剖面图做了一个对比啊，因为它这个文字是图片形式的，所以我翻译不了。上面呢是旧的工艺做的，下面是新工艺做的。旧的工艺呢，就是做出来的以后，大家可以看到啊，我先告诉一下你们，就是所有的这一个图上的这些麦芽颗粒都是60 EBC 的色度啊，都是一样的色度。那么上面的呢，就是能看到它有结晶糖，但是它的剖面做出来就是还是会存在很大一部分的淀粉颗粒。那么下面呢，就是已经是做到很好的这个结晶程度了，就整个都是糖，结晶糖，对吧？那么 大家在看麦芽颗粒就实物的时候，我们下周会在上海有展会，如果你们在上海或者附近周边会来看 CBC 展会的话，可以到现场来，我会给你们看一下它的实物啊。这个颗粒呢就会结晶程度高，然后它比较均匀，颗粒呢膨胀的也是比较大。我第一次看的时候，我还跟吉尔开玩笑，我说你怎么做出来一批胖麦芽了？其实是因为它膨胀开了，那么外观看起来呢也更加大、更加漂亮一些。Okay.
Okay, next slide, please. So in these preliminary results, so I repeat, it's just research. These malts are not available yet, but we were able to produce a different batch of different colors. As you can see here, it goes from 38 EBC to, well, almost 300 EBC. And you can see that we have this complete caramelization rate. These kernels are looking great thanks to this technology. We can really achieve a really high caramelization rate. I think that these colors, so for the lower limit, if we have to choose the kind of colors that we would produce thanks to this technology, it will be from 40 EBC. That's linked to the feasibility of the method, because it's really hard to produce some malts that are lower in terms of colors, but still having not too much moisture and having this high caramelization rate. It's linked to the feasibility of the technique. And then for the 300 EBC, I think it's more linked, like as I explained for the Cara Café. If we start produce some Cara Malts that are beyond that color index, we'll start to have some cocoa burnt flavors that will start to hide the caramel flavors, and that's not interesting in this case.
Okay, understand. 这张图上呢，给大家展示了我们几个剖面图，色度呢差不多从38 EBC 到267个 EBC。那么这边主要是想给大家说一下，其实焦糖麦芽在制作过程当中，它的这个色度啊是有一定受限制的。在往低色度做的时候，就是你既要把它的糖转化出来，结晶糖，又要想要让它颜色很低，这个其实在操作性上是很难实现的。所以我们其实颜色最浅的焦糖麦芽也要到90 EBC 左右，就是淡色焦糖这一款，不能做不到太浅，所以它这个是属于可操作性问题。那么一般从40 EBC 左右，它的结晶糖就做得非常好了，就大家可以看到这个图片上的第一张。再往后呢，颜色越做越深，越容易形成结晶糖，但是它同时产生另一个问题，就是它的香气会有变化。我刚刚在说到我们那个咖啡焦糖麦芽的时候也提到，就它做深了以后会产生一些焦香味儿，咖啡味儿，还有那个可的那种苦的味道。那么这个味道呢，会掩盖掉焦糖本身的这种香气，所以也就变成失去做 Cara 焦糖麦芽的意义了。这就是为什么我们这个整个的色段差不多是在这个范围之内。Okay.
Okay, next, please. So another way to assess the improvement that we have thanks to this technology is to really look at the molecules, the components that are responsible for the caramel flavors. So we can use a method that we call GCMS. So that's gas chromatography coupled with mass spectrometry. Sorry, you don't have to say that. So basically, that's a laboratory technique to measure the quantity of each component that is responsible for flavor. So here what you see is that each time we have a peak is one component, and we compare the old process and the new process. So the new process is with the steam injection. The old process is without the steam injection. And you can see that there are some pretty big differences regarding most of the components. I think I had some pictures on that slide too. Maybe Celine, can you? Yeah, that's it. So here is to make it very simple. So each of these peaks, as you can see, here I illustrated the flavors that are that are responsible. Sorry, try again. I showed with pictures the flavors that are caused by these components. So, for example, the pyrazines, they are responsible for these cocoa bean flavors, and we have much less of this component using these methods. And overall, if you look at the components that are responsible for the caramel flavors, we have much more of them. I will show, no, it's also on the slide. Can you press one again, Celine? Yeah, so thanks. Here I have everything. So overall, what we will have is a malt that is a bit more acid. We don't really know why too, probably because part of the Maillard reaction are still playing here to produce some lactic acid. And also, sorry, acetic acid, not the lactic acid. And the caramel flavors overall, there are more of them using this malt. So the idea is to have a global picture, a big picture of the flavors that you can get and the differences.
Okay, I will try my best to explain all of this.
Yes, sorry. You can summarize. So you can summarize the idea.
这个图呢，其实它讲了蛮多比较专业的信息啊，我尽量的给大家去解释它所想要达到的一个意思。就是我们呢会有一个实验来，就是这个实验的名称是叫这个题目上面写的 GCMS， 它想达到的一个目的呢，就是去分析为什么我们新旧两种生产工艺会给麦芽的这个香气带来不太一样的结果。那么大家在这个这个下面的这个曲线图上可以看到，它其实每一个这个峰啊，这个尖峰值代表的都是一种物质的体现。那么比如你们可以看到从左边到右边不同的，我把我能查得到的这个化学物质的名称都给标上了，还有一些我查不到的呢，我就保留了英文，没有给大家贴上中文啊。然后呢，每一种物质它都用一个图来表示，比如说像这个左下方这个有一个比嗪，对吧？这个比嗪呢，它的这个口味呢，这个味道呢，就有点像可可的那种苦味。那么这个味道呢，在用新工艺制作的时候，比原来就小了30倍。这个符号是这个意思的啊。然后右边这个酸味有一个醋酸，带酸一点的味道。我具体我不太清楚它到底是指的哪一款焦糖麦芽，但是在这个当中分析出来以后，两种工艺对比下来，新的可以比原来增加4.5倍的酸度。那么其他呢，像大家能看到的另外几个，像康泉这个就是麦芽香气焦糖香气增加了2.8倍，下面还有这个物质是增加1.8倍。那么有两个呢是减少，右边这个麦芽醇的这个焦糖风味呢扩大了1.6倍。那么其实给大家展示这个图，主要目的是为了告诉你们，就是我们在做这一些新款设计的时候，是会去追究它的本质原因的，是从这一些化学层面上去追究这个香气的本质原因，以便达到我们所需要的目的和给你们能带来的一些效果。OK。
Okay. Next, yeah. Here, yeah, I'm not going into the details. The idea is to present the same results, but per family of components. So each color is one family, but don't go into the detail. The idea is that if you look at the proportion of each color, you can see that there are some pretty big differences regarding the composition of these malts, even if they have the same color, just because of the process.
这个图是就继刚才的那一张化学分析表类似的性质，我们把它做成了这种轮状图。同样是121 BC 的这个结晶麦芽焦糖麦芽，我们用旧工艺和新工艺来做对比，就可以发现它的成分多多少少会有一些变化。那么这个就是我们现在在做的这些研究。OK.
Okay, next. So if I summarize what has been improved thanks to this technology, so it's just preliminary results, but we have 3 times more components that are responsible for the flavors overall. I mean, we have 2 times more components that are responsible for the caramel flavors and 8 times less cocoa burnt flavors, so also including the pyrazines, for example. And we didn't measure it yet, but we know the astringency, I mean, what you can feel in your throat when drinking the beer, is much lower because we brewed 2 kinds of beer using the old and the new process, and we could really feel a difference. But it needs to be quantified through another technique that is called HPLC.
OK， 那么这边呢就是给上面2张图做了一个总结啊。那大家可以看到，就是说我们这个同样还是121 BC 的这个麦芽，从焦糖香味上来说是提升了，变成了原来的2倍，而这个可可的，也就是这种焦香的气味，就比刚刚我们说到那个可可味的比嗪，它会减少到原来的1/8，它写的是8倍，其实就是相当于是1/8。那么另外关于这个涩味儿，就是我们有一些很多酿酒的时候会问我，就是麦皮带来的这种涩味，在这个用新工艺制造的上面是更少，就体现不出来这种在口腔里面的这种涩味儿。那么具体的到底是有多少的这个数值呢？我们还需要通过一个叫 HPLC 的这个高效液上色谱法来测定。我们现在目前是还没有测出来，之后会有这样的数据来展示的。OK。
Okay, so maybe a take-home message regarding these preliminary results is that when you order a Cara Malts from any malt house, the idea is that you can, as a brewer, just look at the inside of the kernels, and if you see this as on the picture, that's not a complete caramelization. And I think that you can, for your next project, for your next recipe, you can require the best. I mean that you can require malts that are really high regarding caramelization rate, because that's something that is feasible. And currently we ask ourselves the question, what kind of progress is it? Is that incrementation or breakthrough? I mean, are we just improving the caramelization, or are we creating a new malt category? I mean, are we creating malts that have a flavor profile that is so much different than the previous one that you couldn't replace the product in your beer recipe? So that's the idea, that we are still asking ourselves this question. There's still a lot of research to be performed to answer that question.
OK， 这个呢，就是大家如果有平时在使用到结晶麦芽这个系列的产品的时候，用它来酿酒的时候，你们可以自己去切开它来看一下。像这种情况呢，这种情况的这个麦芽颗粒内部，它可能就并不是非常优化的一个结果。你们可以试试看，就是如果说使用我们这个大颗粒的新的焦糖麦芽做出来的这个酒，跟原来的相比是好那么一点点，还是会有突破性的提升。我们的目标呢，其实是想做一个就是无可替代的这种焦糖麦芽。OK.
Okay, good. So also we ask ourselves the question, if this is a breakthrough, if we are creating these caramel malts that have really a new flavor profile, maybe it's going to be possible to go through new beer style. I mean, try to imagine a very light beer, a blonde or even a amber beer with some caramel flavors due to the malts. Currently, that's not possible to find that on the market, because the caramel malts that you use in these beers and that have a low color index, they're not caramelized at all. So if we can caramelize some very low EBC malts, then it will be possible to bring some caramel flavors even for a light color beer. So yeah, as it is the current saying in the malt house market currently, we say malt is the new hop, because IPAs have been through a large trend. There's been a very fashionable beer style, but now people, the brewers, they are still looking for new beer styles that are more focused on other products such as the malts.
OK， 那么这个呢，就是给大家看，比如说像我们平时一般所喝的一些淡啤酒，做的一些淡的啤酒、金色啤酒这样这些类别，一般来说呢，这种啤酒都很少可以用到焦糖系列的麦芽，因为多多少少焦糖麦芽都会给啤酒上色。那如果说你选择一款比较浅色度的这个焦糖麦芽，就其实是可以给这个淡色啤酒也带来一些焦糖香气的。我们在刚刚还说到一个什么问题 ？OK， you can continue。等下我在讲到的时候再跟大家详细来讲啊，解释。
Okay, so now I will let my colleague Gabriel tell you a bit more about how to brew some very useful brewing tips with these caramel malts. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Gil. 他的介绍呢，就是吉尔的介绍呢，就到这边为止。因为接下来这个部分呢是属于实操型的，就是如何使用我们这个焦糖麦芽。因为前面我们所讲的都是关于制麦的这个过程，那么接下来呢就是如何使用焦糖麦芽来应用到我们的啤酒当中。包括刚才他有一点我刚刚忘记的，就是说的，现在比较流行的很多全球风靡的这个 IPA 酒，很多 IPA 酒呢就会投大量的酒花风味啊什么。但是如果你想做一些不同的这个 IPA 风格的酒，就可以从麦芽上面去做一些调整啊。OK， 那么接下来就是由 Gabriela， welcome Gabriela， please， 他来给我们做介绍。
Thank you, Celine, and thank you, Gil, for your presentation. Hello, everyone. Now I'm going to share a few ideas on why and how to use caramel malts to brew and design beers.
OK， 那么这位叫 Gabriela， 她就是我们去年新加入的一个同事啊，之前在很多大啤酒厂都有过很丰富的经验，目前仍然在大学里面修学的一个很有经验的一个酒师。他呢今天会给我们大家来介绍一下如何使用焦糖麦芽酿造啤酒。OK。
Next, please. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is why to use caramel malts to design beers. These type of malts, they bring different colors, aromas, and flavors to the beer. Obviously, most of these aromas are going to be related to caramel flavors, so very sweet flavors. And we can brew very light colors beers with light caramel flavors, or we can go for amber, dark color beers with very intense and sweet flavors from these caramel malts.
那因为我们这个，首先他要给大家来说一下，就是我们为什么要使用焦糖麦芽。那首先呢，焦糖麦芽会改变整个啤酒的色泽、香气、口感这些方面。我们从色度较浅的到色度较深的不同的这一系列的焦糖麦芽，就可以运用在不同设计的啤酒款类当中，既可以做比较浅色的、具有淡淡的焦糖甜味的这种淡色啤酒。也可以做香甜味比较浓郁的这种收口比较浓、口感比较浓的这种焦糖啤酒。Okay,
you can go next. Thank you. So once we use caramel malts, we can have other benefits in the beer. Not only these sweet flavors, but other benefits. For example, they can improve the body of the beer because they bring non-fermentable sugars to the brew. Also, they can improve the mouthfeel of this beer, the texture of the beer, because they have a slightly higher viscosity once we compare to a base malt. And also, they can improve the head retention of this beer.
OK， 那么相比较于一般的这种基础麦芽，还有就是皮尔森酒啊，普通的这种相对来说呢，焦糖麦芽带来的这个效果，除了在颜色、口味上面还会有一些其他方面的影响，比如说它的酒体会更加的醇厚，因为它这个结晶的糖它会变成不可发酵糖残留在酒当中形成残糖，所以这个酒呢 对于比如说某些区域、有些地区的消费者，他可能更喜欢这种带有一点甜甜口感的这种啤酒风味的话，就适合选用这个类别的麦芽。除此以外呢，它因为这个酒里面含有更多的残糖，使得这个酒液的粘稠度也会更高。那么你入口的口感也会跟那种发的比较干的皮尔森酒啊什么不太一样。当然还有第三方面，就是因为糖多了，粘性高了，会使得泡沫更加的丰富和持久。OK.
Next, please. So just to give you an example of this great benefit that Cara Malts can bring to the beer, which is a better head retention, we brew two different beers. We brew one beer using a Cara Malt, which is the Cara Ruby, and we brew another beer with the Cara Abi, which is only a kiln malt. The beer on the left is the one brewed with Cara Malt, and the beer on the right is the one brewed with the kiln malt. And you can see over time the beer with the Cara Malt has a better head retention at the end.
那么接下来这个图呢，可能有很多我们那个城堡麦芽的老粉都已经看过了啊。我们每次在讲焦糖麦芽的这个泡沫的影响的时候，都会拿这张图来做对比。左边呢这是3张图的左边那一杯是用一部分红宝石焦糖麦芽作为特种麦芽添加的，在配方当中的。右边的那一杯呢是没有使用焦糖，而是使用的一个叫修道院麦芽，因为它也是50 EBC 的色度，作为特种麦芽在配方当中。那么随着这个酒液倒出来以后啊，一开始它的泡沫可能都差不多，那么随着时间慢慢推移呢，可以明显的看到带有焦糖麦芽的配方的那杯酒，它的泡沫的稳定性会更好，更加细腻粘稠。Okay.
You can go next. So now I'm going to give you a few tips on how to brew with caramel malts, not only why. And the first thing that we need to do is decide the beer style and the profile of the beer we want to brew. So based on this, we're going to decide the percentage of caramel malt we're going to use in the recipe and the type of caramel malt we're going to use.
OK. 那么刚才呢，就是跟大家简单介绍一下为什么要用焦糖麦芽，也就是它的一些作用。接下来呢，我们会说一说如何来使用啊，也就是它酿造的时候的一些注意点。从左边开始讲啊，首先要做的第一件事情就是你要先想好你要做一款什么样的酒，那么基于你对这个酒的风格的设计，我们才会去考量这个使用焦糖麦芽的量以及用哪一款焦糖麦芽。OK.
Okay, the second thing is we need to remember this type of malt, they bring non-fermentable sugars to the beer. So this will affect the body of the beer. So this beer is going to be a bit more fuller, meaning that we're going to have a higher final gravity in this beer. And also, if you keep the same initial gravity, we might have an impact in the alcohol level of your brew. So it's very important to remember this.
Sorry, could you please repeat?
Yes. So if you brew with caramel malts, you need to remember that you're going to bring non-fermentable sugars to the brew.
Yes.
To the beer. And meaning this, we're going to have a bigger body in your beer, a fuller beer. And you might have some impact in the alcohol level if you brew with this type of malt. So it's very good to remember, you have to remember this type of malt bring non-fermentable sugars to the brew.
OK. 那么第二点呢，就是我们刚刚在说为什么的时候也提到了，就是关于它的不可发酵糖，因为这一部分麦芽，焦糖麦芽它是不可以100%使用的啊，这个大家应该都知道吧？因为它形成结晶糖以后，它就不具有这个发酵力了，所以它是一定搭配着基础麦芽来使用的。这一部分糖，就这一部分焦糖麦芽当中的糖，最终形成残糖以后呢，首先它会使得我们的这个浓度有不一样。在相同的初始浓度，就是叫OG 相同的这个工艺下，整个这个工艺制作完成以后得到的中浓，如果你用了焦糖麦芽，会得到更高，中浓就糖度会更加高一些。除此以外呢，就是因为这部分糖它是不可被发酵，所以它的酒精度也会稍微低一些，就是转化成酒精的这个转化率会少一些。 这个应该清楚吧 ？OK, next.
And also, we need to remember this type of malt brings a higher viscosity to the brew, and this might affect your wort filtration, especially if you're brewing with brewing adjuncts. You need to remember this because you might have lower filtration rates, a longer filtration time.
OK. 那么大家在用这个焦糖麦芽的时候，还需要注意一点呢，就是它的过滤，因为糖度高，所以过滤的速度相对会慢一点。特别是当你们还要用到一些像小麦芽、裸麦芽、燕麦芽这一类，比如说不带有皮的，因为本身它的过滤就比较困难。当你跟焦糖麦芽再结合起来使用的时候，一定要把这个过滤的问题考虑进去。OK。
Okay, and last and very important, you need to remember this type of malt do not have any enzyme activity. They do not have diastatic power. And the brewer needs to remember this because might impact the efficiency of your brew. And this is why we normally suggest to use up to 30% of this type of malt in your grain bill. And if you only do a single temperature mashing, if you do not have a step mashing protocol, I suggest you use 60 to 90 minutes in your mashing tun with a pH of 5.4 to 5.6 to really help the enzymes, and also keep the mixing ratio between 3 to 3.5 liters of water per kilograms of total grain in your grain bill.
OK。那么还有一点就是在下方最重要的这一部分，就是它的酶活性几乎为0。就我刚刚说的，它不具有发酵力啊。这个呢，因为其实在糖化过程当中，麦芽的酶活性是非常重要的，它这个本身就是一个有机的化学反应过程，对吧？那么大家知道，如果你使用这个焦糖麦芽以后，我们工厂的推荐一般是不超过30%的比例，就是在你的麦芽配比当中，焦糖麦芽的总量不超过30%。同时呢，就如果说你们不是用那个就是温度是可调的，就单一温度来去做糖化的话，我们建议你们的时间长度是在60到90分钟啊。然后 pH 值，水的 pH 值是从5.4到5.6，以使得它那个效果最好。同时呢，药水比是按3到3.5升，就每公斤麦芽是配3到3.5升的水，这样使得它的整个糖化工艺达到最优。OK。
Okay, we can go next. So here we have a table with all the caramel malts we have in our range, and they're ranked by the suggested percentage of use. So in this percentage of use, it's based basically on the flavor intensity of this malt and the level of non-fermentable sugars. So for example, the Cara Malts, which is the first one on the table, we suggest to use up to 30% because this type of caramel malt has less intense flavors and more fermentable sugars than the Cara Café, which is the last one in the table, that has very high intense flavors and have no fermentable sugars left. So we only suggest to use up to 15% in your recipe.
OK， 那么这张表呢是给大家列了一下由浅到深我们目前所有的这一些焦糖麦芽系列。大家可以看到颜色最浅的这一款 Cara Clear 淡色焦糖，我们可以推荐最大的使用比例到30%。而最深的这一款咖啡焦糖麦芽，它的推荐比例呢是不超过15%。这里面的区别呢，是因为颜色最浅的这一款，它其实里面多多少少还是会有一些可发酵糖，就是说它并没有完全转化到90%几，接近100啊，而且它的这个焦糖的这种风味儿也不是很浓郁，所以呢多使用一些也是 OK 的。而颜色越深到下面的这个咖啡焦糖麦芽这一些，它的这个焦香味道就会很浓郁了，相对来说，而且它里面基本上已经不含可发酵糖，就它已经全部结晶了，所以我们推荐的比例是不要超过15%。OK。
Can go next. So here I'd like to remember that sometimes I have these questions from brewers that if they ask me if the caramelization can happen during the boil. And I also hear that some people, they overboil the wort to bring those caramel notes to the beer. And I say this is a big mistake. I don't think it's a very good idea. And yes, caramelization can happen in the boil, but normally indicates a problem. Normally indicates you're burning your wort. And this will bring a lot of other problems to your beer. This beer is going to be thermal aged. You're going to have a lower sensory stability in your beer. You're going to have uncontrolled color formation in your brew. You're also going to have some fermentation issues with the free amino nitrogen. You're going to have a less assimilation by the yeast. And also, you're going to destroy the head retention of your beer. You're going to have a worse head retention in your beer. So it's always better to use caramel malts to bring these flavors than overboil your brew.
OK， 那么因为这个Gabriel 他有一些酿酒师朋友也会问他啊，就说如果我不选用你们的焦糖麦芽，而我自己用我的工艺来产生这些焦糖风味儿，有没有可能？那他呢，就是给大家做了一些这样的分析，说，你如果不用焦糖麦芽呢，也是有可能的，但是同时你的这个工艺就在煮沸，它通过延长煮沸麦汁的时间，来使这个麦汁里面产生自己产生一些焦糖的风味，但是会产生一些问题，比如说它有一个 thermal aging 热老化的问题，会产生乙醛的异味，会产生过多的美拉德反应的异味啊。而且你很难，你煮沸的这个蒸发量啊，这些都很难去把控它的最后的色度。还有呢，就是它因为酵母的利用率，它最后里面产生的这个游离氨基氮，它也会利用率会降低。那么同时呢，你的泡沫也会变得不稳定。所以你为了使这个麦汁带有焦糖味道，通过煮沸的这个方法去做，会产生一系列的问题，难以把控的问题，是不值当的。你不如就直接去替换成一部分的焦糖麦芽来的省事。Okay,
we can go next. So now I'm going to give you a few examples of beers you can brew using caramel malts, and we're going to start with the Belgian beer styles.
OK， 那么这边呢就给大家做了一些介绍，就是我们通常在欧美国家会用焦糖麦芽来做的这些啤酒风格啊，比如说从比利时风格的啤酒开始做起。
Yes, so you can use 10 to 15% of Cara Malts in a Belgian beer Golden Strong, for example, which is the first one on the left. And using this type of malt, you're going to have a bigger body in this beer because this beer normally have a lot of sugars in the recipe, down the body of the beer to increase the alcohol level. So using this type of malt, the caramel malt, you're going to have a fuller body and also help with the head retention of this beer.
比如说这边第一款讲到的比利时烈性金啤啊，它这个酒呢里面加了10%到15%的淡色焦糖，大家可以看到它那个整个酒啊，它的那个酒体会比较的浑厚，而且呢，因为它残糖多了嘛，它的那个酒的甜感会比较明显，而且它泡沫也会很奶油。Okay.
We can use 10 to 15% of Cara Blonde in a Belgian blonde beer just to give a nice touch in the color and also to bring very subtle, very nice caramel notes to this beer.
比如第二款比利时金啤当中呢，我们就会选用浅色，就是 Cara Blonde。了解我们焦糖系列的酒师可能都知道啊，就浅色焦糖麦芽，那加在这个里面呢，也会使那个酒的颜色变得有一点稠稠的、厚厚的，使它的味道带有一点点甜度。
And we can use 8 to 12% of Cara Ruby in a Belgian double, just to help as well with the color, but also to give a nice, intense caramel flavor to this beer style.
那么像如果我们使用到这第三款啊，在这个比利时双料啤酒当中，如果加8%到12%的红宝石焦糖麦芽，它就不仅仅是带来像口感上面的差别，它还会带来一些颜色上面的影响，比如因为红宝石它本身就是已经有50个 EBC 的色度了，会给它的 酒体上带来一些颜色上的调和。OK。
Yeah, next, please. So now talking about English beer styles, we can also use the caramel malts, and for example, we can use up to 5% in an English pale ale to help with also with the body and with the head retention of this beer. And I think I'm going to explain all of them very quickly.
Okay.
We can use 3 to 10% of Cara Blonde in a golden ale. This beer is quite hoppy, and Cara Blonde matches very well with this the hoppy notes from this beer style in a golden ale. And finally, we can use 3 to 8% of Cara Ruby in a London Brown ale to really help with the sweetness in this beer style.
OK， 那么这个为什么你们可以在这个屏幕上面画来画去？我擦一下啊。OK， 那大家可以看到这上面3个酒，它一起介绍了一下。左边这一个呢是加入了5%左右的淡色焦糖麦芽，使得主要是目的，因为它颜色也挺浅的，主要是增甜、增稠泡沫。那么中间这个呢，它加入了一部分的浅色焦糖，在黄金埃尔当中，英式黄金埃尔当中，加这个酒以后，加入这部分麦芽以后呢，它这个跟酒花的香气是非常的协调的。那么在第3个这个酒，就是伦敦棕色埃尔这一款酒当中，加入3%到8%的红宝石焦糖麦芽，它是因为这款酒本身就是比较甜的。我理解的就是这些酒可能都是在欧洲啊，在比利时这些国家比较流行的，所以我不知道咱们国内有没有酒是有做过。如果没做过的话，咱们就先了解一下也好。这款酒呢，棕色埃尔就本身就是带甜的，所以加入红宝石焦糖麦芽跟它的本身的口感是毫无违和感的。Okay.
Okay, next, please. We also can use the caramel malts to brew German beer styles. So, for example, we can use 5 to 10% of Cara Claire in a German Pilsen to help with the body and to help with the head retention of this beer. We can use up to 10% of Cara Blonde in a Kolsch, and Cara Blonde will help with the color of this beer to have a very nice pale golden color, and Cara Blonde matches very well with the yeast notes in this beer style, the yeast flavors. And finally, we can use 3 to 6% of Cara Ruby in a Helles Bock, only to give a help with the color of this beer, to make this beer very golden color.
OK。那么这边3款啤酒呢，也都是各自加了一点点焦糖麦芽，我就不一个一个细说了啊。那么中间这一款叫科隆的这个酒呢，说我们的这个浅色焦糖麦芽跟它的本身所使用的酵母口味是非常搭的。然后最后这一款呢，用一点点红宝石焦糖麦芽，主要是给这个酒增色的。这个是德式风格的啊。OK。
Next, please. And finally, talking about American beer styles, we can also use the caramel malts. In American light lager, we can use 10 to 15% of Cara Claire. This type of beer normally have a lot of maize or even rice. And to help with the body of this beer and head retention, we can use Cara Claire.
Okay.
New England IPA, which is a very popular style, and I quite like this style. We can also use caramel malts. It's not very traditional, but we can use caramel malts to give an extra sweet notes to this beer style and help with the color as well. That's the big difference between a New England style with not caramel malts or with caramel malts, just the sweet notes and also help with the color. And finally, we can use 5 to 10% of Cara Ruby in an East Coast IPA, which is a very hoppy beer, and will bring a lot of caramel notes and help with amber color.
OK。那这边的3款呢是美式风格的啤酒，可能都是目前我们比较流行的一些风味啊。左边这个美式淡拉格呢，我们会用10%到15%的淡色焦糖麦芽。那这个酒呢，它也是淡淡的色泽，同时用了这一点点焦糖麦芽，会使得它的那个酒的颜色会略带一点点混的这个效果。那么中间这个呢，就是新英格兰混浊 IPA。 现在在中国也非常流行的一款啤酒。那么传统上呢是不会加这个焦糖系列的麦芽的。那我们推荐呢使用10%到15%的比例在麦芽配比当中，就会使这个混浊 IPA 带有一点点甜甜的口感，会更加的易于入口同时它对于这个混浊也是能起到一定的效果的。大家如果感兴趣的话可以试试，如果你们平时本身就在酿混浊 IPA 的话，可以试一下用焦糖麦芽替换一部分比例以后得到的效果是如何的。那么最后呢，这个东海岸 IPA 呢也是会用红宝石焦糖麦芽一点点来调节它的啤酒色度。Okay,
we can go next slide. So now I'm going to share with you a full recipe of traditional beer, the Irish Red Ale, which is a beer that I like very much. And talking a bit about the history of this style was born in Ireland and is actually based in the adaptation or maybe an interpretation of the English bitter style, which is a famous style as well.
那么这边呢，他介绍一款就是 Gabriel 他自己非常喜欢的啤酒，是叫爱尔兰红啤酒。那么这个呢，就是它有着悠久的历史起源于爱尔兰，也有人说它其实就是原来风靡英国的一个苦啤酒，而演变转化过来的。
And the traditional ingredients used to brew this style is a good base malt, the good Pilsen malt or pale ale malt, with roasted barley or maybe black malt, which is roasted malt, to give the color, to help with the flavor of this beer. But what I found very interesting is in the past, caramel malt was used as well, but only for special beers, only for special brews, because caramel malt back in the days was quite very expensive to the brewers get their hands on it. So they only save caramel malts for the best occasions.
Okay. 那这个原始传统上面这个爱尔兰红啤酒呢，一般是在基础麦芽，也就是皮尔森或者是淡色埃尔这一些基麦当中加入少量的烘焙大麦或者是黑麦芽来作为特种麦芽来调色和调香的。那么后来呢，是因为人们认为这个焦糖麦芽当时也是使用的，但是人们发现这个焦糖麦芽的价格相对会更贵一些，所以只有在某一些有特殊需求的场合才会去用到焦糖麦芽来酿造这一款爱尔兰红啤酒。那现在当然不会有这样太明显的价格上的差别Okay.
Yes, and just to finish the beer profile, the profile of this beer, it's very nice. It's very drinkable beer. It is very malty, and depending on the brew, if you're using roasted malt, it's going to focus more on the roasted notes, coffee notes, and chocolate notes. And if you're using a caramel malt to brew this beer, it's going to be a bit more sweet, a bit more caramelly. And the hoppiness, it's not very strong. We only have bitterness enough to balance the maltiness, and this beer is very drinkable.
那如果说就因为它有可能也可以用焦糖麦芽，也可以不用。那么如果不用的话呢，它的口感就更加带有一些苦苦的焦香味的这种带有咖啡味的这种风味儿。如果是使用了一部分的这个焦糖麦芽在这一款爱尔兰红啤酒当中呢，它就会更甜，更加非常的适饮性，就是很能够畅饮的，很入口。Okay.
Next, please. And this is the recipe. So if you follow this recipe, you're going to end up brewing a 5% Irish Red Ale with a color around 40 EBC and 20 IBU in bitterness. And if you look into the malt list, I used Cara Ruby, 15% of Cara Ruby, which is our caramel malt, to give a very nice touch of caramel. I'm not going to go into details on how to brew this beer, but you can find this recipe and many others on our website, or even if you can contact us, we can send you some ideas or some recipes.
Okay. 那这边这一页呢，我先做一些背景的说明因为比利时这个国家呢，它是我们工厂所在的地区是讲法语的，所以它这一张配方的原始 原始文字是用的法文。那我本人一开始最初是学法语的啊，我是法文翻译。那么英文呢我也可以翻，所以这张配方呢，因为是图片形式，所以我不能去修改它里面的文字，我就没有翻，否则我得把整个这一张图都换掉。所以如果说你们有感兴趣的话，我可以帮你们做成一个中文的格式，然后发给你们啊。回头我们再单独联系，我在那个群里面，你们可以加我。在这个列表当中，大家可以看到，它设计的时候所使用的配比是皮尔森2轮大麦，就是我们的这个皮尔森麦芽73%。然后呢，设计人是加了15%的红宝石焦糖麦芽，就是我们今天主讲的这个款别。同时呢，它还加了一部分的类黑素，10%的类黑素麦芽，使得它带有这种红红的颜色。类黑素麦芽是一个上红色的麦芽啊，然后再加了2%的烘焙大麦。这个文字呢，我不知道大家有没有我们城堡麦芽做的那个手册里面啊，那个手册里面都有。反正你们如果问我要配方的话，我会都给你们翻译成中文的啊。这个酒它的酒精度是4.5，最终成品。色度呢是在40个 EBC， 苦度是在22 BU， 所以它其实并没有非常浓烈的这种各方面的指标都不是很浓烈，所以适饮性就很强了。当然这个 Gabriel 他本身还有一部分工作就是会给大家来设计配方。有一些客户说我当地的人他就喜欢什么样的酒，你们原来的这个配方他们喝起来觉得太苦啦或者太甜啦，他都可以来帮你们做调整，有需要也可以来找我们。 OK。
Okay, next.
It's finished.
Yeah, so thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you to Gil, and a big thanks to Celine for translating this webinar.
No problem.
Thank you.
谢谢 Gabriel 给我们做的这个讲座，基本上也到这边就结束了。那么今天呢，整个环节就是先讲了这个焦糖麦芽的制作工艺，然后后面是讲了它的一些使用的方法。我们呢就是给大家先展示一些基础的信息，至于每个酿酒师在使用过程当中的一些具体的细节，都可以随时来跟我们沟通，好吧？现在还有we leave the 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A.
Yes.
OK， 那么接下来我们大概有5到10分钟的时间，如果各位有问题或者想要跟我们做一些交流的话，就可以举手示意我，好不好？有没有人需要提问题的？无论是跟焦糖麦芽有关的，还是跟其他麦芽，我们跟比利时的，或者不是我们城堡的一些配方上面的问题，也可以来跟我们沟通，好吗？机会比较难得哦。没有问题吗？
有一个问题来，
你好，
请教一下那个这个啤酒的，就如果要酿造像那种慕尼黑啤酒节类型的啤酒的话，他们这个配方用你们的城堡麦芽，你们有什么样的推荐呢？
是慕尼黑啤酒吗？是酿造？
对，就是像那种慕尼黑啤酒节用的那种4月庆典类型的窖藏啤酒。如果用你们的麦芽，想产生的味道是有这个面包的香味和蜂蜜的香味，但是做成一种拉格的类型的啤酒。
就是说您这边是需要给啤酒节设计一款酒，然后风格实际上是属于拉格，但是呢又想带有面包风味，是不是这样子？
对，面包和蜂蜜的味道。
面包和蜂蜜的味道。OK， 来跟他们说一下啊。Okay, I have a question here. The brewer wants to design a beer for the beer festival. And the beer type is anyway a lager, but with some bread note and honey flavor. How do you think he can design this recipe?
Okay. I would give you my idea. So if it's a lager, it has to be a pale color beer, normally. And
it's a lager beer, yes, he said.
A pale color with maybe 5% in alcohol. I would use to give those very nice malty flavors and with these honey notes he's looking for, I would use 10% of Cara Claire and 5% of Cara Honey, which is our newest malt.
Okay.
And he can get his hands on this new malt. I think it's a very good malt to bring this flavor for a lager. And only use noble hops like a Saaz hops or maybe Hallertau.
Saaz or Hallertau.
Hallertau.
How do you spell it, please? H-A.
Yeah, I don't even know how to spell it.
Okay, anyway, we can.
Hallertau.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you. Thank you, Gil.
English professor.
What about
It's
the
a
base
German name.
Yeah, it's very German. The base malt, a Pilsen malt.
Pilsen, about 85%?
85%, yes.
Okay. Okay, I will tell him. Okay. 是刚刚是马先生问的吗？这个问题？
对的。
OK，我刚刚跟他解释了一下您的这个需求啊，就为啤酒节设计的一款拉格酒，带有面包和蜂蜜的香气，对吧？蜂蜜的口味然后它是这样子的，就是说，如果说您大概的酒精度，这个酒设计的酒精度配方在5%度左右这样子，那么他推荐的一个配方比例呢，是用85%的基础麦芽皮尔森，加上10%的我们这个淡色焦糖麦芽，再加上5%的这个蜂蜜焦糖麦芽。这个蜂蜜焦糖麦芽是我们去年新出的一款，是非常值得尝试的一款麦芽，它会给你的酒带来浓浓的这种香气味道。同时呢，搭配的酒花，他建议是用萨兹，或者还有一款是叫这个我也不知道怎么Hallertau，它就是 Hallertau， 这是一个德语词。OK。
它这个配方我有一点不理解，就是我看你们的介绍，你们那个慕尼黑麦芽应该是面包味，就有烤面包的风味比较重，为什么它没有推荐用慕尼黑麦芽呢
？OK， 那我来问一下啊。Gabriel, he still further asks, because he knows our Munich malt. He thinks Munich malt can bring a lot of bread flavor. Why don't you suggest a part of Munich malt in this recipe?
Yes, he can also use Munich malt. It's very common in lagers, especially German lagers, to bring this maltiness, extra maltiness, bready, cookie flavors. But I was just trying to keep it simple and focusing more on the honey notes. But he could add in that recipe, I think he could add maybe 10% of Munich malt.
To replace which one? Pilsen or?
No, he adds 10% of Munich malt, 5% of Cara Honey, and only 5% of Cara Claire.
The rest is Pilsen again.
The rest is Pilsen again, yeah. The base malt has to be Pilsen.
Okay, understand.
Yeah, but Munich malt is a very good malt, and it's very traditional in German lagers.
Okay.
Yes, it's good malt.
OK， 马先生是这样的，他说没有问题，就是如果您想要去使用这个慕尼黑麦芽，也是完全可以。他刚刚没有说呢，是主要是因为想要集中精力来跟您讲一下，就是推荐使用蜂蜜焦糖的这一款。那么他调整了一下，就如果说您想要去使用这个慕尼黑麦芽，让它带有一些德式风味的拉格这个啤酒的味道的话，就是用80%的皮尔森加10%的慕尼黑麦芽。再加5%的淡色焦糖和5%的蜂蜜焦糖，这样清楚吗？
好的。
好，谢谢您的问题。Okay, thank you for your explanation.
You're welcome.
Let me see. I still receive some questions in the chat. 淡色焦糖麦芽的结晶度大概多少比例 ？OK. I have a question from the chat dialogue. The brewer asks, what is the percentage of caramelization of Cara Claire? It's a question for Gil, I think.
Yes, it's really low. Cara Claire, let me check. So it will be something like, yeah, something like 30% maximum.
Okay.
Even lower.
Okay.
Lower than 30, I think, because in fact, the lower the color, the lower the caramelization rate. It's
You mentioned
because you have to understand that to produce Cara Claire, we have to run a longer recipe at lower temperature, and because the temperature are not high enough, it's really hard to caramelize because we have to dry the product to reach a low moisture level, and we cannot use higher temperature.
OK，这位刚才有变猛啊，在这个对话框里面提的问题，我来给您回复一下。确实就是如您所了解的，就颜色越浅的焦糖麦芽，它的结晶度呢会越低，因为这是它的工艺的一个限制。刚刚我们在 PPT 里面也有说到。那么对于城堡来说，我们最浅的这个色度的淡色焦糖麦芽 Cara Claire， 它的色度呢，我们官方宣布的是9 EBC 左右。那么在这个色度下，我们能做到的焦糖结晶度差不多在30%这样子。那么有可能还不到一些啊，这个并不能够非常去跟非常深色的那一些焦糖麦芽去比较。然后还有
also, yeah, maybe something to add is that this malt is in fact not used to provide caramel flavors usually. It's more used like for technical purposes. So it's sometimes called dextrin malt in other malt houses. So that's the kind of malt you might use to bring some non-fermentable sugars, so the dextrins, to your brew, and also maybe to have some beneficial aspect on your head and foam, so it is not really used to bring some caramel flavors. It's more technical.
And it's from the function point, it's more similar to a base malt.
No, that's not a base malt. So it's low color, but it's like a dextrin malt. So you'll get, just like Gabriel explained, you'll get with this malt, you'll get more non-fermentable sugars, so a beer with more body, better foam. So it's it's for this aspect, not for the flavors that we use it.
OK， 行，那这么说就是这个刚刚就补充了一下啊，这位变猛同学，淡色焦糖麦芽呢，可能更多的作用并不是说要给它用来上色，或者说是带来焦糖风味的，它的更多的功能只是从技术表层面上来给这个啤酒带一点点不可发酵糖，带入一些不可发酵糖。同时呢，使它那个泡沫更加稳定一些，因为有一些泡沫它如果全部用技术麦芽的话，它消得很快，所以加入一些淡色焦糖麦芽，它能起到这方面的作用，而不是说要给它啤酒带来这种焦糖的风味。OK， 谈一下焦糖麦芽在美式 IPA 和英式 IPA 中的运用，这个可能会有一点多啊，有一点长，我看一下。OK， 反正问题不是很多，我再说一下。A brewer is asking if we can explain the different usage of Cara Malts in American IPA and English IPA.
Okay.
Is it clear, my question?
It is, yeah. So the big difference here is the different styles. So American IPAs, they normally are focused in hoppiness. They add a lot of hops, making this beer very bitter and also with high alcohol levels. Whereas in the English IPAs, normally they focus more on the malts. It's more a malty beer, not too hoppy, and also not too alcoholic. So this is the biggest difference between them. Knowing this, I think it's easier to use caramel malts in English IPAs than in American IPAs. But It's also very useful to use caramel malts in American IPAs to balance this bitterness and also to bring some colors.
Okay.
But between those two, it's more caramel malts. They use more caramel malts in English IPAs.
OK。这位宗文，您好啊，我来回答一下您这个问题。首先呢，在对比美式 IPA 和英式 IPA 的应用方面，我们先要了解这两种风格的酒，它的本身有什么区别。美式 IPA 呢，通常会加入大量的酒花，使它产生一定的苦度值，同时呢，它的酒精度数也会相对更高一些。而英式的 IPA 呢，它可能更加突出麦芽香气，同时也不会有放太多的酒花，或者说是酒精度数很高这样子。所以呢，一般在英式 IPA 中加入焦糖麦芽的应用会更加容易一些。我们通常直接加入这一部分比例以后，使它带有这种麦芽香气就可以。而在美式 IPA 当中加入焦糖麦芽的目的呢，更多的是为了中和它这个苦度，因为焦糖麦芽本身是带甜口的嘛，所以它的加入一部分这个麦芽可以中和它的这个苦度值和它的这个酒花的浓郁的味道，同时呢也会给美式 IPA 增加一些色度，基本上是应用方面是这样的区别。我不知道有没有答到您的问题 ，OK？ 如果还有不清楚的，您可以在下面再回复我啊。OPPO A97 说焙炒焦糖麦芽时可能会有麦芽粘炉现象，你们一般是怎样处理这部分麦芽和炉体的？这个是指我们这个生产焦糖麦芽的过程，对吧 ？OK。Another question is about the malting process. The brewer is asking, when we roast the caramels in a drum, maybe they are also making the malts, I think. We will be facing with the problem that the malts are sticking to the drum, to the inner wall of the drum. How do we treat such a problem? How do we treat with the malts and the drum itself? C'est clair?
Right. So indeed, what after saccharification, so that's sometimes also called stewing. That is so the idea is that we reach the point at which the kernels, the inside of the kernels is almost liquid. It's completely liquefied because of the saccharification. We transform it in simple sugars, and that's even a way that the master used to check for a very good stewing. You just take the kernel and you squeeze it, and it will pop. It's very impressive. So that's the way we check for a good saccharification. And at this point, after the saccharification, the kernels are indeed very fragile. If we squeeze them against the drum walls, it will indeed caramelize against the walls. So the tip to avoid that is to manipulate the green malt after saccharification very, very carefully. So we move it very slowly, and we avoid to crush it, because the husk still has a resistance that is high enough to avoid the inside to get out. So if we manipulate it very slowly at the beginning, then we avoid the inside of the kernel to get out. But the husk is not sticky at all. The husk is not sticky. Mm-hmm. So that's the tricky thing. That's to manipulate the product carefully.
Okay, so we don't have this such problems in our maltery. Okay.
Now, and also we have roasting drums that have a low capacity. So the best way to produce high quality specialty malts is to use roasting drums that don't go beyond 1 ton capacity, because it's well known by several maltsters that if you use a huge roasting drums, the way it moves inside is going to be different. Usually, the roasting drums that have a higher capacity are not bigger in diameter, they are just longer to avoid such problems. But using small capacity drums is a good way to avoid several problems and to ensure good quality.
Okay, I will try to explain him. 这位 OPPO A97 我不知道您这边是不是也是自己有在炒麦芽啊？那反正我们可以给到一些制麦过程当中的信息，就是我们公司呢在做这个焦糖麦芽的时候，并不太会遇到这种粘炉的这个现象，就您刚刚提到的。那有几个技巧，首先第一，为什么它会粘炉？主要是因为麦芽颗粒的内部在经过糖化以后再加热，本身它那个里面的糖分已经转成糖了，所以一旦它又是一个液态的状态，在加热过程当中呢，它有可能会爆裂。本身这个麦皮它是不粘的，它是没有粘粘性的，而里面的这个糖浆一旦爆裂出来的话，就会变得比较粘稠。所以您要做的就是避免使这些麦芽颗粒爆裂开来。那么这个呢，第一点就是在转移这些麦芽的时候，一定是要小心操作，轻拿轻放。还有第二点呢，就是我们在做焦糖麦芽烘烤的时候，一炉的量不会太大，通常不建议你们超过1吨，应该是1吨啊。让我确认一下啊。Just for verification, Gil, you mentioned the batch should be less than 1 ton, correct? In the drum.
That's what we use. I would say that's not a strict limit, but I would say the smaller the drum, the better the quality.
Okay, understand. 他说这个1吨的量并不是就是像限制一样，你绝对不能超过。但是我们是这样操作的，因为量越小越可以避免这种情况。量大嘛，它肯定是受热容易不均匀。那么或者呢，就是比如说有一些工厂，它必须要做到大批量的话，它可能它那个烘烤的炉子，它并不是体积的大，而是变成一个长条状的。这个具体我也想象不出来到底是什么样，它只是口头上这样描述，是用一个长形的，而不是用大的圆形。OK， 那么这个呢，可能有可以帮助您就是避免这种焦糖麦芽去粘炉的这个现象，好不好？因为我们没有这个问题，所以具体怎么弄不太好回答。从原理上分析是这样的一个意思。OK。那我们今天要不就这样吧，会已经开了差不多有2个小时了，也谢谢各位听众坚持到现在有20多位。Okay, I said that's already for 2 hours today. Maybe we can stop here for the Cara Malts. And thank you for everyone, for your presenters and for the participants.
Yes, thank you, Celine. Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you
to
all
the
attendees.
Okay.
Looking forward to meet you again.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Gabriel. 谢谢大家。那我们下次活动会再提前给大家通报的，希望大家还能来参加我们的网络会议。OK， 拜拜。
拜拜。
拜拜。